In 1984, an American commune amassed more guns than the local police department. They drove armed patrols through neighboring towns. And when federal agents finally arrived, they found a military compound disguised as a spiritual retreat. This is the story of Rajneeshpuram, a religious community built in Central Oregon between 1981 and 1985. Founded by followers of Indian guru Bhagwan Shree Rajneesh, the settlement grew from empty ranch land into a small city of 4,000 residents in just 3 years. What made it extraordinary was not its spiritual philosophy or its wealth, but the private army its leaders assembled to defend it. By 1984, commune members had stockpiled semi-automatic rifles, surveillance equipment, and riot gear. They operated their own police force with arrest authority. The story matters today because it reveals how quickly isolated groups can militarize when they feel threatened, and how legal gray zones allow private security to become private armies. Bhagwan Shree Rajneesh arrived in the United States in June 1981. His secretary, Ma Anand Sheela, purchased the 64,000-acre Big Muddy Ranch in rural Wasco County, Oregon, for $6 million. The land was isolated, surrounded by cattle ranches and small towns where populations measured in hundreds, not thousands. Within months, his followers began construction. They called their new city Rajneeshpuram. Hundreds of sannyasins, the name for Rajneesh's disciples, lived in tents while building roads, a reservoir, and housing complexes. They incorporated the settlement as a legal city in 1982, complete with its own zip code and municipal government. Local residents grew alarmed. The nearest town, Antelope, had only 40 residents. Suddenly, thousands of red-robed strangers were moving in, buying property, and voting in local elections. In 1982, Rajneeshis won enough seats to control the Antelope City Council. They renamed streets after Indian spiritual figures. They outvoted longtime residents on every local decision. Tensions escalated through 1983. According to multiple witnesses, locals began driving past the commune at night, shouting threats. The state government challenged Rajneeshpuram's legal status, arguing that a religious city violated separation of church and state. Federal immigration officials investigated whether foreign sannyasins had entered the country illegally. The commune leadership felt besieged. Ma Anand Sheela responded by creating the Peace Force in late 1983. This was officially a private security team, but former members later described it as a paramilitary unit. The Peace Force acquired Ruger Mini 14 rifles which could fire 30-round magazines. They bought Galil semi-automatic rifles from Israel. They purchased silencers, body armor, and night vision equipment. By mid-1984, the Peace Force numbered over 100 members. They wore military-style uniforms and carried weapons openly while patrolling commune property. According to Oregon State Police reports, they also patrolled public roads in nearby towns. Residents of Antelope reported armed convoys driving through their town at night, vehicles with no license plates and tinted windows. The commune also built infrastructure for armed defense. Aerial photographs from 1984 show guard towers at entry points, equipped with spotlights and radio systems. Former members later testified that leadership had discussed destroying bridges and roads if police attempted to raid the property. The crisis reached its peak in September 1984. Commune members allegedly poisoned salad bars in the Dalles, Oregon, attempting to incapacitate voters before a county election. 751 people fell ill with salmonella. It remains the largest bioterror attack in U.S. history. Though this plot was not directly connected to the Peace Force, it showed how far leadership would go to maintain control. In September 1985, federal agents raided Rajneeshpuram. Ma Anand Sheela had already fled to Germany, later arrested and extradited. Agents found the weapons cache, wiretapping equipment in dozens of buildings, and a secret laboratory where toxins had been cultivated. The Peace Force dissolved without resistance. Bhagwan Shree Rajneesh was arrested attempting to flee the country, pleaded guilty to immigration fraud, and was deported. The core facts about the Peace Force and its arsenal come from multiple independent sources. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms cataloged weapons during the 1985 raid, documenting over 100 firearms including semi-automatic rifles, shotguns, and handguns. Photographs of armed patrols exist from both law enforcement surveillance and media coverage throughout 1984. Former Peace Force members testified during federal grand jury proceedings in 1985 and 1986. These testimonies, now part of public court records, describe weapons training, patrol routes, and leadership discussions about defending the commune by force. Some witnesses had immunity agreements, which courts noted when weighing credibility. Oregon State Police and Wasco County Sheriff's Office filed incident reports documenting armed patrols on public roads. These reports noted vehicle descriptions, dates, and locations where armed commune members were observed. However, no arrests were made during these encounters, partly because officers were uncertain about jurisdictional authority and partly because they feared escalating tensions. Media documentation was extensive. The Oregonian newspaper published investigative series throughout 1983 and 1984, including interviews with both commune members and local residents. National outlets including ABC News and 60 Minutes documented the situation with on-site reporting. This contemporary footage confirms the presence of armed patrols, guard towers, and military-style uniforms. Physical evidence included the weapons themselves, surveillance equipment found in over 90 locations throughout the commune, and the laboratory where Salmonella bacteria was cultivated. The bioterror plot, initially alleged, was confirmed through CDC investigation and later confessions by participants who received reduced sentences. Commune leadership always maintained they were responding to legitimate threats. In interviews before her arrest, Ma Anand Sheela stated that locals had threatened violence, that Oregon officials were conducting a coordinated campaign of harassment, and that the peace force existed only for defensive purposes. Some former members still argue the weapons were necessary given the hostile environment. Local residents told a different story. They acknowledged distrust and opposition but denied making violent threats or organizing harassment campaigns. Many described feeling terrorized by armed patrols through their towns. The question of who escalated first remains contested. Legal experts disagreed about whether the peace force was technically legal. Oregon law allowed private security on private property and allowed licensed individuals to carry weapons. However, the scale of armament and the off-property patrols pushed boundaries. No charges were ever filed specifically for weapons possession, partly because prosecutors focused on more serious crimes like bioterrorism and immigration fraud. Some gaps remain. The exact chain of command within the peace force was never fully documented. While Sheela clearly authorized its creation, the degree to which Rajneesh himself knew about or approved the weapons is unclear. Rajneesh claimed ignorance of many illegal activities, though former members offered contradictory testimony. The situation traumatized residents of surrounding communities. Elderly residents of Antelope described living in constant fear, watching armed strangers patrol their town, uncertain whether expressing opposition might bring retaliation. Some families moved away. The town itself effectively ceased to exist as a non-Rajneeshi community during the period of commune control. For many sannyasins, the collapse of Rajneeshpuram was devastating. Thousands had donated life savings, moved continents, and invested years building the city. When it ended, they lost homes, community, and for some, their faith. Many had not known about the weapons, the bioterror plot, or other illegal activities. They felt betrayed by leadership and vilified by the public. The 751 Salmonella victims, though they recovered, experienced a violation of public trust. The deliberate contamination of food was an attack on the most basic sense of safety in daily life. Some experienced lasting anxiety about eating in public places. Religious scholars point out that isolated religious communities often develop siege mentalities. When a group believes the outside world is hostile, internal cohesion increases, but so does willingness to violate outside norms. Think of it like a biological cell under stress. The membrane hardens, the internal chemistry changes, and what was once permeable becomes defensive. This explains how spiritual communities can transform into armed camps. Legal experts note that U.S. gun laws and private property rights create spaces where private militias can form almost invisibly. If you own enough land, You can train with military weapons, build fortifications, and operate armed patrols, all while claiming it's just enhanced security. The line between legal self-defense and illegal paramilitary activity remains blurry, especially in rural areas with limited law enforcement oversight. The broader pattern matters because Rajneeshpuram was not unique, only extreme. Other religious communities, survivalist groups, and political movements have assembled private security forces that resemble armies. The Branch Davidians in Waco, Texas, had similar dynamics. Militia movements throughout the American West have tested these same legal boundaries. Understanding how escalation happens helps prevent future confrontations. Here's what we know for certain. A religious community built a private security force with over 100 members and military-grade weapons between 1983 and 1985. This force patrolled both private and public areas, created defensive infrastructure, and existed in a legal gray zone that authorities struggled to address. What remains debated is whether this was reasonable self-defense against genuine threats or preparation for violent resistance against legitimate law enforcement. The question worth considering is how society should handle groups that arm themselves while claiming only defensive intentions. The Rajneeshpuram site still exists as a Christian youth camp called Washington Family Ranch, owned by Young Life Ministries. The buildings remain, though the guard towers were dismantled. Some of the original infrastructure is still used. Ma Anand Sheela served 39 months in federal prison, was released in 1988, and now lives in Switzerland operating care homes for the disabled. She has never expressed full remorse for her actions, maintaining that circumstances justified her decisions. Bhagwan Shree Rajneesh, later known as Osho, died in India in 1990. His teachings remain popular. Meditation centers using his methods operate worldwide, though none attempt to recreate Rajneeshpuram's political structure. Legal frameworks have not substantially changed. Private security companies can still accumulate significant armaments if they follow state licensing requirements. Rural counties still struggle with how to monitor or limit such activities. Future confrontations between isolated communities and government authorities remain possible. The Rajneeshi episode shows how idealism can curdle when confronted with power. A community founded on spiritual liberation built not only meditation halls but armories. Not only love communes but barbed wire fences. What began as a philosophical experiment became an armed microstate within a democracy. The most haunting element may be that many residents sincerely believed they were participating in a utopian project. They built homes, farms, and art centers. They meditated, sang, and loved freely. Yet, simultaneously, others among them planned chemical attacks and stockpiled rifles. Both realities coexisted, one spiritual, one militant, until the latter destroyed the former. When historians study Rajneeshpuram, they often use it as a case study in the sociology of isolation. How group identity can amplify under pressure, how charismatic leadership can justify extreme measures, and how bureaucratic neglect allows dangerous experiments to grow unnoticed. Had federal and state agencies coordinated earlier, through transparent zoning enforcement and dialogue, the escalation might have been avoided. Instead, mistrust widened until both sides armed themselves in anticipation of conflict that, fortunately, never erupted into open war. Walking the site today feels eerie. Wind blows through empty structures built with zeal and faith. Silence fills the meditation hall where thousands once chanted. The desert, indifferent and eternal, reclaims what ideology constructed. Dust gathers where sermons once echoed. The lesson is not simply about religion or crime. It's about how human beings, seeking meaning and belonging, can create systems that magnify both compassion and cruelty. Rajneeshpuram reminds us that utopias are fragile, and that belief, untempered by accountability, can justify almost anything. In every ideology lies a mirror. One side shows liberation, the other domination. The Rajneeshis wanted freedom from worldly constraints. In chasing it, they built their own. Law schools still teach the Rajneeshpuram case when discussing the limits of religious freedom, land use law, and biosecurity. It stands as a warning about how regulatory loopholes can be exploited by those who believe their purpose transcends the law. In the end, the story is neither about villains nor saints. It's about ordinary people swept into extraordinary circumstances, their hopes redirected by power and paranoia. History rarely divides neatly into good and evil. It bleeds through shades of intention and consequence. Rajneeshpuram vanished, but the questions it raised remain alive. How much freedom should a group have to create its own world? At what point does faith become sovereignty? And when belief demands control of others, who protects the rest of us? The dust of Oregon still holds the answers, silent, waiting, and watching.